Anderson cautiously approached the storage room, his heart pounding louder with each step. The dim light from the store's back alley barely seeped through the small window, casting eerie shadows on the stacked boxes. He paused at the doorway, straining to hear the source of the rustling noise. His mind raced with possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. Was it a thief, a wild animal, or something even more sinister? Taking a deep breath, he stepped into the room, his eyes scanning the cluttered space. With a sudden movement, a figure emerged from behind a stack of boxes, causing Mr. Anderson to jump back in alarm. It was a young man, disheveled and clearly startled by Mr. Anderson's presence. The young man's hands were trembling as he clutched a small box, his eyes wide with fear. Mr. Anderson's initial shock quickly turned to a mix of anger and disbelief. He couldn't understand why someone would break into his store, especially someone so young. He took a step forward, trying to compose himself and keep his voice steady. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" he demanded, his voice firm but edged with disbelief. The young man, clearly panicked, dropped the box and raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. "Please, don't call the police," he pleaded, his voice shaky. "I didn't want to do this, but I had no choice." Mr. Anderson's anger began to wane as he looked into the young man's eyes. There was a depth of desperation there that he couldn't ignore. He took another step closer, his tone softening slightly. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, genuinely curious about the young man's predicament. The young man hesitated for a moment, as if weighing his options. Finally, he sighed and lowered his hands, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "My name is Jason," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I lost my job a few months ago, and my mother is very sick. We can't afford her medication, and I didn't know where else to turn." Mr. Anderson listened intently, his heart aching for the young man. He couldn't imagine the weight of such a burden, especially for someone so young. He glanced around the storage room, taking in the scattered boxes and the small, dimly lit space. It was a stark contrast to the warmth and order of the main store, a place where he spent most of his days. He motioned for Jason to follow him back to the front of the store. "Come on," he said gently. "Let's sit down and talk." Jason hesitated for a moment before nodding and following Mr. Anderson to the front of the store. They sat down near the counter, the flickering light casting a warm glow over the space. Mr. Anderson could see the exhaustion etched into Jason's face, the lines of worry and fatigue that seemed far too deep for someone his age. "Tell me more about your situation," Mr. Anderson encouraged, his voice filled with compassion. Jason took a deep breath and began to explain. His mother had been diagnosed with a serious illness, and their savings had quickly dwindled with the mounting medical bills. Despite his best efforts, he couldn't find steady work, and they were on the brink of losing everything. Desperation had driven him to make a choice he deeply regretted. Mr. Anderson listened carefully, his heart going out to Jason and his mother. He knew the struggles of living in a small town, where opportunities were limited and the community had to rely on each other. As Jason finished his story, Mr. Anderson reached out and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "We'll figure something out," he said softly. "This town looks after its own." Just then, the door to the store swung open, and Mrs. Thompson, one of the town's most outspoken residents, walked in. She took one look at Jason and immediately jumped to conclusions. "What on earth is going on here, Mr. Anderson? Is this boy causing trouble?" she demanded, her voice filled with indignation. Mr. Anderson quickly stood up and moved to calm her down. "Mrs. Thompson, please let me explain," he said, his voice steady and calm. He then proceeded to explain Jason's situation, detailing the struggles he and his mother were facing. Mrs. Thompson's expression softened as she listened, And by the time Mr. Anderson finished, she was nodding in understanding. "Well, we can't just stand by and do nothing," she said firmly. "We need to help them." Word of Jason's plight spread quickly through the town, and soon a meeting was called at the town hall. The community gathered, their faces a mix of concern and determination. They discussed various ways to support Jason and his mother, with Mrs. Thompson suggesting a fundraiser. "We can organize bake sales, car washes, and donation drives," she suggested. "This town looks after its own." The community rallied together, organizing events and pooling their resources. The town's spirit of solidarity and compassion shone brightly as they worked tirelessly to raise money. The fundraising events were a huge success, with townspeople chatting and encouraging each other as they baked, washed cars, and collected donations. As the weeks passed, the funds raised provided much-needed relief for Jason and his mother. They were able to afford the medication and treatments necessary for her recovery. The town's efforts didn't stop there. They also helped Jason find a new job at the local hardware store. On his first day, the store owner greeted him warmly. "Glad to have you on board, Jason," he said with a smile. "Let's get to work." Jason felt a sense of relief and determination as he started his new job. He was grateful for the opportunity and the support of the community that had rallied around him in his time of need. Mr. Anderson, who had been a constant source of encouragement, noticed Jason's skill at fixing things and suggested he start a repair service. "You have a real knack for this, Jason," he said with a proud smile. "Why don't you start a repair service here?" Jason took Mr. Anderson's advice to heart and soon found himself busy with repair work. One day, while organizing the storage room, he stumbled upon an old photograph. It was a picture of Mr. Anderson and a woman, both smiling warmly at the camera. Curiosity piqued. Jason showed the photograph to Mr. Anderson. "Who is this?" he asked. Mr. Anderson's eyes softened as he looked at the picture. "That's my sister, Lily," he explained. "She moved away many years ago." Jason's eyes widened in realization. "Lily Anderson? That's my grandmother's name." The revelation hit them both like a tidal wave. They were family, connected by a bond they had never known existed. With tears of joy, Mr. Anderson embraced Jason, feeling a sense of unity and joy that words couldn't fully capture. The town celebrated the newfound family bond, reinforcing their tight-knit community spirit. Jason and Mr. Anderson's story became a testament to the power of compassion, resilience, and the unbreakable ties that bind us all. Mr. Anderson guided Jason to a chair near the counter, his face softening with a blend of compassion and curiosity. He gently urged Jason to sit and took a seat across from him. The store, now quiet and dimly lit, seemed to envelop them in a cocoon of stillness, amplifying the weight of the moment. Mr. Anderson leaned forward, his voice gentle and inviting. He wanted to understand, to peel back the layers of whatever had driven this young man to such desperate measures. Jason, still tense and visibly shaken, took a deep breath. He began to speak, his words tumbling out in a raw and unfiltered stream. He explained how his mother had fallen gravely ill, how the medical bills had piled up, and how he had tried every possible avenue to make ends meet. He recounted the sleepless nights spent worrying, the countless job applications that went unanswered, and the crushing burden of watching his mother's health deteriorate before his eyes. As Jason's story unfolded, Mr. Anderson listened intently, his heart aching with empathy. He could see the desperation in Jason's eyes, the weight of responsibility that seemed far too heavy for such young shoulders. Jason's voice wavered as he spoke about his mother's condition, the helpless feeling of not being able to provide for her, and the shame that had driven him to this act of desperation. Mr. Anderson's gaze never wavered. He absorbed every word, understanding the gravity of Jason's situation. He felt a surge of compassion, a deep-seated need to help this young man who had found himself backed into a corner. Jason finished his plea, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear, as if bracing himself for judgment or rejection. The store's silence seemed to stretch on for an eternity before Mr. Anderson finally spoke. His voice was calm and reassuring, a stark contrast to the turmoil that had just been laid bare before him. He told Jason that he understood, that he could see how much he cared for his mother and how hard he had been trying to support her. He assured Jason that he wasn't in trouble, that he wouldn't call the police, and that he wanted to find a way to help. Jason's eyes widened in disbelief, a glimmer of hope sparking to life amidst the darkness. Mr. Anderson took a moment to think, his mind racing through possible solutions. He knew that simply offering money wouldn't be enough. Jason needed something more sustainable, something that would give him a sense of purpose and stability. As the two of them sat in the quiet store, an idea began to take shape in Mr. Anderson's mind. He proposed that they talk to the townspeople to see if they could come together to help Jason and his mother. He suggested organizing a fundraiser, rallying the community to support one of their own. He also mentioned the possibility of finding Jason a job, something that would provide a steady income and a sense of security. Jason listened, his hope growing with each word. He could hardly believe the kindness being extended to him, the lifeline being thrown his way. He nodded, a mix of gratitude and determination filling his eyes. He promised to do whatever it took, to work hard and make the most of any opportunity given to him. Mr. Anderson smiled, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. He knew that this was just the beginning, that there would be challenges ahead, but he felt confident that together they could make a difference. He stood up, extending a hand to Jason, who took it with a firm grip. The bond was formed, a silent agreement to face the obstacles ahead together. As they walked towards the door, Mr. Anderson felt a sense of hope and unity. He knew that the road ahead would not be easy, but he also knew that with the support of the community, they could overcome any obstacle. The night sky stretched out before them, a canvas of endless possibilities, and for the first time in a long while, Jason felt a glimmer of hope for the future. Mrs. Thompson's heels clicked sharply against the pavement as she approached the front of Anderson's General Goods. The setting sun cast long shadows, and the warm hues of the evening made the storefront look almost serene. However, the tranquility was quickly shattered by Mrs. Thompson's stern voice. She burst through the door, her eyes immediately locking onto Jason, who was seated near the counter, looking worn and anxious. Her eyebrows knitted together in a deep frown as she took in the scene before her. The tension in the air was palpable, and it seemed as though the very walls of the store were holding their breath. "What on earth is going on here, Mr. Anderson? Is this boy causing trouble?" Mrs. Thompson's voice was filled with suspicion and a hint of accusation. Her gaze was sharp and unyielding, as if she were trying to pierce through Jason's very soul. Mr. Anderson, standing behind the counter, looked up from the ledger he had been updating. His eyes met Mrs. Thompson's with a calm and steady gaze. He could sense the potential for conflict, but he had always been a man of patience and understanding. He knew that jumping to conclusions would only make matters worse. Taking a deep breath, Mr. Anderson began to explain Jason's situation. He spoke of the young man's desperate circumstances, his ailing mother, and the sheer hopelessness that had driven him to such an act of desperation. His voice was gentle, yet firm, as he relayed the story with compassion and empathy. Mrs. Thompson's stern expression began to soften as she listened to Mr. Anderson's words. She glanced at Jason, who sat with his head bowed, his eyes filled with a mixture of shame and hope. The tension in the room seemed to ease, replaced by a growing sense of understanding. As Mr. Anderson finished his explanation, Mrs. Thompson let out a sigh. She could see the sincerity in both men's eyes, and her initial assumptions began to crumble. She realized that there was more to the story than what she had first perceived. With a nod, she approached Jason and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Her voice, now filled with a newfound warmth, conveyed a sense of solidarity and support. She assured him that the community would come together to help him and his mother in their time of need. In that moment, the potential for conflict dissolved, replaced by a shared sense of compassion and unity. The small town of Maplewood had always taken pride in looking after its own, and this situation was no different. Mrs. Thompson's arrival, though initially tense, had ultimately paved the way for a deeper connection among the townspeople. As the evening continued, the store's atmosphere shifted from one of tension to one of hope. The front of Anderson's general goods became a place where stories were shared, solutions were discussed, and hearts were opened. The bonds of the community grew stronger, and the path forward became clearer for Jason and his mother. In the days that followed, the town rallied together, organizing meetings, fundraisers, and other events to support Jason's family. The seed of compassion planted that evening at the store blossomed into a full-fledged movement of solidarity and care. And as Jason found his footing and began to rebuild his life, he knew that he had the unwavering support of the entire community behind him. The town hall was abuzz with the murmurs of concerned townspeople, each face painted with worry and determination. Rows of wooden chairs filled up quickly as neighbors settled in for the meeting, their voices blending into a hum of solidarity. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and anticipation, a testament to the historic building that had long served as the town's gathering place. Mr. Anderson stood at the front, his eyes scanning the crowd, feeling a sense of pride in his community. Beside him, Mrs. Thompson adjusted her glasses and cleared her throat, ready to address the assembly. The room quieted down as she stepped forward, her voice steady and filled with purpose. "We are here tonight to discuss how we can help Jason and his mother," she began, her words carrying the weight of community spirit. "We all know times have been tough, but Maplewood has always looked after its own." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, heads nodding in unison. Mrs. Thompson continued, outlining the dire situation that Jason and his mother were facing. The townspeople listened intently, their hearts going out to the young man who had found himself in such desperate circumstances. As she finished speaking, a hand shot up from the middle of the room. It was Mr. Baker, the local mechanic, known for his gruff exterior but kind heart. "We can organize a fundraiser or something," he suggested, his voice echoing through the hall. "This town has always been good at coming together when it matters." Applause and murmurs of approval followed his suggestion. Ideas began to flow freely, each more generous than the last. Mrs. Jenkins proposed a bake sale, her eyes lighting up at the thought of the delicious treats she could prepare. The high school principal offered the use of the gymnasium for a community auction. Even the children, sensing the importance of the moment, whispered excitedly about organizing a car wash. Mr. Anderson took the floor again, thanking everyone for their kindness and willingness to help. He shared stories of how the town had come together in the past, each tale reinforcing the bond that held the community together. As he spoke, he saw the determination in the eyes of his neighbors, a collective resolve to make a difference. The meeting went on, plans taking shape with each passing minute. Volunteers signed up for different tasks, their spirits lifted by the sense of purpose that filled the room. The town hall, once filled with the hum of concern, now buzzed with the energy of action and hope. As the meeting drew to a close, Mrs. Thompson stood once more, her voice filled with gratitude. Thank you all for coming tonight. Your generosity and compassion are what make Maplewood a wonderful place to live. Together, we will make sure Jason and his mother get the help they need. The townspeople filed out of the hall, their hearts lighter, each carrying a piece of the plan they had collectively forged. They knew the road ahead would not be easy, but they were confident that, together, they could overcome any obstacle. The night air was cool as they dispersed into the streets, but there was a warmth in their hearts that no chill could touch. Maplewood was more than just a town, it was a family. And tonight, that family had come together to lift up one of their own. The town of Maplewood was buzzing with activity as various fundraising events sprang up across the community. The spirit of solidarity was palpable, with everyone eager to contribute in any way they could. The town square, usually serene, transformed into a vibrant hub of activity. Tables laden with freshly baked goods lined the sidewalks, their enticing aromas wafting through the air, mingling with the laughter and chatter of townspeople. Mrs. Thompson, who had initially been wary of Jason, stood behind a table piled high with an assortment of cakes and cookies. She called out to passers-by, her voice filled with newfound warmth and enthusiasm. Families strolled through the square, children tugging at their parents' hands, eager to spend their pocket money on sweet treats. The sense of community was infectious, with neighbors greeting each other warmly and sharing stories as they worked side by side. Down the street, a group of teenagers had organized a car wash in the parking lot of the local church. Buckets of soapy water and sponges were being passed around as cars lined up, their owners chatting and laughing while waiting their turn. The sun shone brightly, casting a golden glow over the scene as water splashed and glistened, reflecting the collective hope that had enveloped the town. In the park, a donation drive was in full swing. Tables were set up with boxes and bins, rapidly filling with clothes, toys, and household items. Mrs. Anderson, always a pillar of the community, organized and sorted the donations with practiced efficiency. She exchanged kind words and smiles with those who came to contribute, her heart swelling with pride at the generosity on display. Throughout the day, the sense of hope and unity only grew stronger. People who had scarcely spoken before found themselves working together seamlessly, their shared goal creating bonds that transcended their differences. Stories of Jason and his mother circulated, each retelling imbued with empathy and determination to make a difference. As evening approached, the events began to wind down, but the spirit of the day lingered. Tables were emptied of their baked goods, cars sparkled after their washes, and the donation bins were filled to the brim. The townspeople gathered in the square once more, their faces glowing with the satisfaction of a day well spent. Mr. Anderson, who had quietly observed the day's events, felt a profound sense of gratitude. The community had come together in a way he had never seen before, and it filled him with hope for the future. As he looked around at the smiling faces, he knew that this was only the beginning. The money raised and the donations collected would go a long way in helping Jason and his mother, but the true gift had been the strengthening of the community bond. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm, golden light over Maplewood. The townspeople began to disperse, their hearts full and their spirits lifted. They had come together in a time of need, and in doing so, had discovered the true meaning of community. Jason had been through a lot over the past few weeks, but today marked a new chapter in his life. Stepping into the local hardware store, he felt a mix of relief and determination wash over him. The familiar scent of wood, metal, and fresh paint greeted him as he walked through the aisles. It was comforting in a way, a reminder of simpler times when he used to help his grandfather fix things around the house. The store owner, Mr. Mullins, was a kind-hearted man in his 50s with a graying beard and a welcoming smile. He had heard about Jason's situation from the town meetings and fundraising events. The community of Maplewood had rallied behind Jason and his sick mother, and Mr. Mullins was more than happy to offer him a job. "Glad to have you on board," Mr. Mullins said, extending his hand. Jason shook it firmly, feeling the rough calluses that spoke of years of hard work. "Let's get to work." Jason nodded, feeling a sense of purpose. He was determined to prove himself and make the most of this opportunity. Mr. Mullins handed him a uniform and showed him around the store, explaining the layout and the different sections. Jason listened intently, soaking in every detail. Throughout the day, Jason found himself learning a lot. He was shown how to stock shelves, assist customers, and even operate the cash register. It was a lot to take in, but he tackled each task with enthusiasm. Every time he felt a little overwhelmed, he reminded himself why he was doing this, for his mother, for their future. During a quiet moment in the afternoon, Jason found himself reflecting on how much his life had changed. Just a few weeks ago, he was desperate and scared, breaking into Mr. Anderson's store out of sheer desperation. Now, he had a job, a supportive community, and a glimmer of hope. The weight of his responsibilities felt a little lighter knowing that he wasn't alone. Mr. Mullins was patient and encouraging, offering tips and guidance without ever making Jason feel inadequate. Jason appreciated that more than he could express. He wanted to do well, not just for himself, but to show the town that their faith in him was not misplaced. By the end of the day, Jason was tired but satisfied. He had made it through his first day without any major hiccups. Mr. Mullins clapped him on the shoulder as they locked up the store. "You did good today, Jason. Keep it up." Jason smiled, feeling a swell of pride. He walked home with a spring in his step, eager to share the day's events with his mother. She was his rock, and he knew that seeing him succeed would lift her spirits as well. As the days turned into weeks, Jason grew more confident in his role at the hardware store. He started to recognize the regular customers and even made a few friends among his coworkers. The sense of community that had always been a part of Maplewood now felt personal to him. He was no longer an outsider looking in. He was part of the fabric of this town. Each paycheck he brought home was a step closer to securing a better future for his mother. They were able to afford her medications and even save a little for any unforeseen expenses. The relief of financial stability allowed Jason to focus more on his work and less on his worries. One afternoon, as he was helping a customer find the right type of screws, Mr. Anderson walked into the store. Jason's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't seen Mr. Anderson much since that fateful night in the general goods store. He had been so grateful for the older man's understanding and the way he had rallied the town to support him. Mr. Anderson gave him a warm smile and a nod of approval. "I hear you're doing well here, Jason. Keep up the good work." Jason thanked him, feeling a renewed sense of determination. This job was more than just a means to an end. It was a testament to the second chance he had been given. He was determined not to squander it. As the weeks went by, Jason's diligence and hard work did not go unnoticed. Mr. Mullins began to trust him with more responsibilities, even letting him manage the store on his own during busy weekends. Jason took pride in his work, always striving to do his best. One evening, as he was closing up the store, Jason took a moment to reflect on how far he had come. The journey had been tough, but he had grown stronger and more resilient because of it. He was grateful for the support of the community and the chance to prove himself. Looking around the hardware store, he realized that it had become more than just a place of work. It was a symbol of his new beginning, a testament to the power of compassion and second chances. With a heart full of gratitude and determination, Jason knew that he could face whatever challenges lay ahead. He was ready for the future, and he was not alone. In the storage room of Anderson's General Goods, the air was filled with the scent of old wood and dust. Jason was bent over an old radio, screws and wires scattered around him. His fingers moved deftly, reconnecting circuits and tightening bolts with the precision of someone who had been doing this all his life. Mr. Anderson, who had just come to check on some inventory, stood silently by the doorway, watching the young man work. Mr. Anderson observed how Jason's hands moved with confidence, his brow furrowed in concentration. It was a rare sight to see someone so young with such a natural talent for fixing things. He felt a sense of pride, and a spark of an idea began to form in his mind. Perhaps there was more to Jason's skills than just a hobby. Perhaps there was a future here, in this very store. As Jason finished tightening the last screw, he stood up and wiped his hands on a rag, a look of satisfaction on his face. He turned to Mr. Anderson, who was still standing by the door. "It's fixed," Jason said simply, a small smile playing on his lips. Mr. Anderson walked over, his eyes twinkling with admiration. He picked up the radio and turned it on. The room was instantly filled with the warm, nostalgic tones of an old jazz tune, clear and crisp. Mr. Anderson nodded appreciatively. "You have a real knack for this, Jason," he said, his voice full of encouragement. "Why don't you start a repair service here?" Jason's eyes widened in surprise. He had never considered his skills to be anything more than a means to pass the time or help out his family. The idea of turning it into a service, a business, was both thrilling and terrifying. He looked at Mr. Anderson, searching his face for any sign of doubt, but all he saw was unwavering belief. "But do you really think I can do it?" Jason asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Mr. Anderson placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Of course you can. You've got the talent, and I've got the space. We can set up a little corner in the store for your repairs. The folks around here trust you, Jason. They'll come to you with their broken radios, toasters, clocks, and more. You'll see." Jason felt a rush of optimism wash over him. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of purpose, a direction. The storage room, with its clutter and chaos, suddenly seemed full of potential. He could picture it now, shelves lined with tools, a workbench in the corner, and customers coming in with their broken items, leaving with smiles on their faces. Over the next few days, Jason and Mr. Anderson worked tirelessly to set up the repair corner. They cleared out space, organized tools, and put up a sign that read, "Jason's Repair Service. If it's broken, I can fix it." The townspeople were curious at first, but soon, word spread about Jason's skills. People started bringing in all sorts of things: lamps that wouldn't light, watches that had stopped ticking, even an old phonograph that hadn't played a note in years. Each item Jason fixed brought a sense of accomplishment and a deeper bond with the community. The townspeople were grateful, not just for the repairs, but for the care and attention Jason put into each job. They admired his dedication and began to see him as an integral part of their close-knit town. One evening, after closing time, Jason and Mr. Anderson sat in the storage room, now transformed into a bustling repair shop. They were tired but happy, surrounded by the hum of newly fixed appliances. Jason looked around, feeling a profound sense of belonging. He realized that this little corner of Anderson's General Goods was more than just a workplace. It was a symbol of his growth and the unwavering support of the community. Mr. Anderson looked at Jason, a proud smile on his face. "You've done good, Jason. "I knew you could," he said, his voice filled with warmth. Jason nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Anderson, for everything," he replied, his voice sincere. As they sat there, the soft glow of the workbench light casting shadows on the walls, Jason felt a renewed sense of hope for the future. He knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, he had the support of Mr. Anderson and the entire town. With a heart full of optimism and a mind brimming with ideas, Jason looked forward to the days to come, ready to tackle whatever came his way. The storage room, once just a place for old boxes and forgotten items, had become a beacon of possibility. And in that moment, surrounded by the hum of repaired gadgets and the warmth of friendship, Jason knew he had found his calling. Jason had been working in the storage room of Anderson's General Goods, organizing and cataloging the various items that had accumulated over the years. The room was a treasure trove of forgotten memories and old relics, each box a potential time capsule. As he moved a particularly heavy crate, something caught his eye, a worn, sepia-toned photograph peeking out from between some dusty ledgers. Curiosity piqued, Jason carefully picked up the photograph. It depicted a younger Mr. Anderson standing beside a woman. They both wore wide smiles, the kind that spoke of shared joy and a deep bond. The edges of the photograph were frayed, and the image had started to fade, but the warmth of the moment it captured was still palpable. Jason felt a sudden rush of emotions, a mix of curiosity and an inexplicable sense of realization. The woman in the photograph seemed oddly familiar, as if he had seen her somewhere before. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just an old picture. He decided to approach Mr. Anderson, who was busy at the front of the store. Holding the photograph gently, Jason asked, "Who is this?" Mr. Anderson looked up, his eyes softening as they landed on the photograph. A wistful smile appeared on his face. "That's my sister, Lily," he said, his voice tinged with nostalgia. "She moved away many years ago." Jason's heart skipped a beat. The name Lily Anderson resonated in his mind, sparking a connection. He hesitated for a moment, then ventured, "Lily Anderson? That's my grandmother's name." Mr. Anderson's eyes widened in surprise, and for a moment, the world seemed to stand still. The realization dawned on both of them simultaneously, filling the room with a profound silence. Mr. Anderson's sister, Lily, was Jason's grandmother. They were family. As the weight of this revelation settled in, Mr. Anderson's expression changed from surprise to joy. He reached out and embraced Jason, tears welling up in his eyes. The bond between them, once unknown, now felt unbreakable. It was a moment of unity, a bridge between the past and the present, bringing them closer in ways they had never imagined. In the days that followed, the town of Maplewood buzzed with the news of the newfound family connection. The townspeople, already united by their efforts to help Jason and his mother, now had another reason to celebrate. The bond between Mr. Anderson and Jason symbolized the strength and resilience of their community. As Jason continued to work in the store, he felt a renewed sense of belonging. The storage room, once just a place of work, had become a space of discovery and connection. Each item he handled seemed to carry a piece of his family's history, intertwining with the stories of the town. The photograph, now framed and placed prominently in the store, served as a reminder of the journey they had all taken together. It was a testament to the power of family, both found and rediscovered, and the enduring spirit of the Maplewood community. Through their collective efforts, they had not only helped Jason and his mother, but also unearthed a deeper connection that strengthened their bonds. And as they moved forward, they did so with a greater sense of unity, knowing that they were all part of something much larger than themselves. Mr. Anderson stood at the front of his store, the familiar scent of aged wood and spices filling the air. The sun was setting, casting a golden hue through the large windows. Jason stood across from him, holding the old photograph that had sparked an unexpected revelation. Mr. Anderson's eyes welled up as the realization dawned upon him. He took a step closer to Jason, his voice trembling with emotion. They had discovered that Jason was not just a stranger in need, but was, in fact, family. He was Lily's grandson, a connection that brought both joy and a sense of unity to Mr. Anderson's heart. With tears streaming down his face, Mr. Anderson embraced Jason tightly. The young man, initially caught off guard, soon returned the embrace. The weight of their shared history and newfound bond was palpable. They held on to each other, the embrace a silent acknowledgement of the family they now realized they were. As they stepped back, the townspeople, who had gathered outside the store, began to cheer. Word had spread quickly through the tight-knit community of Maplewood, and they were eager to celebrate this newfound family bond. The spirit of joy and unity filled the air as the town came together to welcome Jason into their fold. The celebration continued into the evening, with the townspeople sharing stories, laughter, and tears of joy. The bond between Mr. Anderson and Jason served as a reminder of the importance of family, both by blood and by choice. The store, once just a place of business, had now become a symbol of unity and love for the entire community. The night was filled with music, food, and the warmth of a community that cared deeply for one another. Jason, who had once been a stranger in need, was now embraced as a beloved member of the town. The sense of belonging and acceptance he felt was overwhelming, and he couldn't help but feel grateful for the turn of events that had led him to this moment. As the festivities began to wind down, Mr. Anderson and Jason stood side by side, looking out at the joyous crowd. They knew that their lives had been forever changed by this discovery. The bond they shared would only grow stronger with time, and the support of the community would continue to uplift them both. In the days that followed, Jason found himself more integrated into the life of Maplewood. He continued working at the hardware store and started offering his repair services at Anderson's General Goods. The townspeople, always eager to support one of their own, brought in items for him to fix, further solidifying his place in the community. Mr. Anderson, now buoyed by the presence of his newfound family, found a renewed sense of purpose. He took Jason under his wing, sharing stories of the past and teaching him the values that had shaped the town. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day, a testament to the power of family and community. The town of Maplewood, with its close-knit community and strong sense of solidarity, had always been a special place. But now, with the addition of Jason and the deepening of their family ties, it had become even more so. The spirit of love, unity, and support that permeated the town was a beacon of hope for all who lived there. As time went on, the story of Mr. Anderson and Jason's reunion became a cherished tale in Maplewood. It was a reminder that family could be found in the most unexpected places and that the bonds of love and community were unbreakable. The town continued to thrive, its residents bound together by the shared values of compassion and solidarity. Jason, now fully embraced by the town and his newfound family, felt a sense of fulfillment and purpose that he had never known before. He knew that he was exactly where he was meant to be, surrounded by people who cared for him and supported him unconditionally. The journey that had brought him to Maplewood had been filled with challenges, but it had ultimately led him to a place of belonging and love. And so, the story of Mr. Anderson and Jason's reunion came to be a symbol of hope and unity for the town of Maplewood. It was a story that would be passed down through generations, a reminder of the power of family, both by blood and by choice, and the strength of a community that stood together through thick and thin.